Hi, I'm Malcolm Stern, and in conjunction with my friends John and Sandra Wilson from Online Events, we're creating a series of podcasts called Slay Your Dragons with Compassion. My book of the same name was conceived and inspired by the suicide of my daughter Melissa and the journey that took me on and the internal resources that I found. All of my guests will have a story to tell around overcoming and ultimately thriving through adversity. Special thanks to the band Stairway, Jim McCarty and Louis Chinamo, for the use of theme music from their album Medicine Dance, and my engineer Owen Santiago. I hope you enjoy this series, and thanks for listening. So, welcome to my podcast Slay Your Dragons with Compassion, which I'm doing in conjunction with my friends John and Sandra Wilson at Online Events. Very happy today to be exploring with Jenny Boyd, who is part of pop history, actually rock history. Travelled with the Beatles to see the Maharishi in their very early days, and has written a wonderful book about her life involved with all of rock called The Icons of Rock, and currently writing a fiction novel as well. You've had an amazing life. I mean, travelling with the Beatles, and your sister, of course, is Pattie Boyd, who was married to George Harrison. You got to be close up with some of the sort of legends of our time. Also, not to forget that you married Mick Fleetwood of Fleetwood Mac as well. Twice was it that you married him, was it?
Yep, twice,
Twice,
yes.
yes. So you've actually been around that world, and I wonder what you learned in that world. What we're exploring here in this series is how adversity has shaped people's lives, and often, we what looks like glamour is not glamour at all. I mean, you obviously have a. Oh, I think I forgot to mention, of course, was that Donovan wrote Jennifer Juniper for you as well, which must be lovely having a song, especially a beautiful song. I found myself just as I was changing my clothes because I normally wear t-shirts. I was just changing my shirt and I just think humming Jennifer Juniper. I just thought what an
Oh,
iconic song that is actually, and that
yeah,
was written for you by
yeah,
Donovan.
yes. And that's why my memoir is called Jennifer Juniper.
Oh, great,
Yeah,
great.
what was it? Yeah, this journey beyond the muse. No, so not just the Jennifer Juniper, but she had a journey.
And there must be such sort of projection, and when you're in traveling, moving in those circles, to be a beautiful model, which you were, to be with the Beatles and hanging out with the Beatles, and of course seeing the normality beyond the legend of that as well. So maybe we could start with your trip to see the Maharishi with your sister and with the Beatles.
Yeah, okay. Well, just before that, I'd spent 6 months in San Francisco, excuse me, um, in 1967 without any idea about flower power or what was going on there. But I
Yeah.
was searching. I'd got what I'd called like a spiritual awakening before that, and I didn't want to do modeling anymore. But I didn't know what I was searching for. And then a friend just happened to say, well, would you come to help me with my shop I'm opening in San Francisco? So 3 months rent on my flat or a one-way ticket to San Francisco. So I bought the one-way ticket, and that's when I saw all these, the subculture really, and everybody was searching exactly the experience that I had had, and um, and using either acid or smoking pot or but it was in a very innocent way, and a lot of it was searching. Music was very important, the San Francisco bands, and when the Beatles brought out All You Need Is Love, it's like, oh, what a relief, we don't need to be searching anymore. All we need is love. But the musicians were the spokespeople of our time. And when I got back, Patty and George came to, because I've been telling them about San Francisco and how wonderful it was, and that they would be able to walk down Haight-Ashbury no problem because everybody was very cool. Well, by the time they arrived in August, all the sort of original hippies had gone to Marin County or they'd gone to Sausalito, and you had all the people that had turned on, tuned in, and dropped out right across America. So when we walked down Haight-Ashbury, they thought we should actually all take some acid, so you really get the sort of feel of the place. So we were all kind of out of our minds walking down Haight-Ashbury. And and then finally George sat sort of by the panhandle and someone gave him a guitar. And they were saying, play a tune, play us, give us a few notes, give us a few chords. And what he did was say, okay, well, this is C and this is D and this is A. And then he gave the guitar back and we walked back towards the limo that wouldn't come down Haight-Ashbury. And that was it. They said, Jenny, we're taking you home. It's time you came back. And the 6 months was up. So I was staying with them for a while when we heard about Maharishi. And Patty had already met, or not sure she'd met him, but she'd come across him probably the year before when George was on tour. And so we all went to listen to him talk at it's in Park Lane, one of the big hotels. And he realized he had the Beatles in the audience. And then had said, okay, well, I'd like you all to come, the Beatles, and I was part of their gang, to Wales and get initiated. And so we all went there. And while we were there, he said what he wanted the Beatles to come to India and to spread the word and to learn how to be initiators, and that he was going to set up a place in London. So I thought, well, great, at least I can be part of that and help in some way or whatever. And we were all given our mantras. And then when Brian Epstein died, came back prematurely, and I was in the car with Patty and George, and they dropped me off in London. And when I had to get out, I was obviously staying in London then, and I said to George, said goodbye to them, and he said, "How would you like to come to India with us?" And I remember saying, "How can I ever thank you?" And he said, "Just be yourself." And for me, that has been a mantra in itself, and that's been the journey really. And obviously he had spoken to Patty, and they decided because they knew we were all on this spiritual path, and that was probably the most amazing trip I have ever been on. And
Take some beat, actually.
yeah, it takes some beating,
Yes.
and we had our own sort of it was quite hard to explain, but we had our own rooms and our own sort of bungalow in those with those rooms, along the corridor. So we all had our own room. And then there were other bungalows all the way down with different people who were in there. But we had our own bungalow. And they would sit on the roof during the day and they would bring their guitars, George and Paul and John, and start playing songs, just things they would make up just off the hoof, or John couldn't sleep very well. And he said, he started singing that song, I couldn't sleep. And then, of course, Prudence, and she was kind of lost the plot and gone into a sort of trance, and nobody could get her out. I'd gone in there with this pipe I'd brought back from San Francisco, and John went in with his guitar and just started singing Dear Prudence. So, what was extraordinary that everything that was going on in that ashram was all they needed to create songs.
That's
And many years later, when it was actually a dissertation about creativity, and that's when I interviewed all the musicians. It was just remembering that time where they were so creative. And at one point, I wasn't well, and every now and then a doctor would appear because people who weren't well, but we were way out off the beaten track, and so I had a high fever, and a doctor came, and he said it was tonsillitis, which was a bit strange. But luckily, because the high fever got worse and worse, and luckily another doctor happened to be around that day, and of course it was dysentery, that everybody had got. And so I was in bed, and then people would come and sort of say, hope you're feeling okay. John and Cynthia came in, and John had done this wonderful drawing of a sort of guru type person with um, he was he was cross-legged, playing a flute and a basket with a snake coming out. And he'd written underneath, by the power that's in and the power that's out, I cast your tonsil lighthouse out. Love, John and Sin. And so what I'm trying to get at is that they were so creative.
yes.
Everything was about creating something, music, drawing, whatever it was. So yeah, it was an extraordinary time.
And it's so easy to sort of project onto John, George, Paul, Ringo. It's like they're as these amazing figures, but you were around them in real life. And
Mm.
I mean, I've always been very drawn to George. I always felt like there was something so deeply spiritual and sort of wise about him.
Yeah.
But these were human beings. So how did that show up in your meetings with them?
Well, I suppose it was easy for them to be human beings there because everybody was on the same path. There was no sort of photographers, or, well, actually, there was one guy who came to visit his mother who was there, Paul Saltzman, and he ended up, and they befriended him, and he ended up creating a wonderful book of all the photographs of them and all of us. But generally, they weren't hassled in any way. They could be normal human beings, and
Right.
nobody said, "Oh, well, I want to sit next to them," at the sort of lunch table, or it was just like everybody doing their thing.
Lovely. And so, of course, you didn't realize you were in the midst of history being made as well.
No, exactly. I was 19. Life is exciting because you're 19.
Yes, exactly.
Mm.
And so you got into transcendental meditation, which became a big part of your life, I think, for quite a long time. Is it still a part of your life
Well,
now?
it is interesting you should ask that because I always meditated and I did the TM meditation for quite some time. And then I came across Paramahansa Yogananda, the Self-Realization Fellowship, when we moved to LA. And George had given me the book, years before when I was a teenager. And I would often go there with a friend of mine and we'd do all the chanting and stuff. But then I did Buddhist meditation for quite some time. And now I've gone back to TM just in the last couple of months, actually.
Oh, okay,
And
right.
using my same mantra that I was given when I was 19, 18, 19.
Well, and
And
I
it's
know
great.
that
Still good.
George, I think John became disillusioned with the Maharishi and sort of like stormed out. I don't know if that's the
Yeah,
story.
so what happened is that the person that I was rented a flat from in London at that time, John called him Magic Alex. He wasn't magic at all. John was seeing him do something or other while he was on acid and thought that Alex was magic. But anyway, just before I went off on that trip, um, John and Cynthia came round to the place where we were staying because John and Alex had sort of a good relationship, and Alex was trying to get him to go to his guru. I mean, I don't know if he even had a guru,
Mm.
but actually, there was a jealousy there. So when we were at the ashram, at some point, right towards, I don't know, after we'd been there about 2 months or so, Alex came over and I thought, uh-oh, here comes trouble. And sure enough, he befriended we would see him walking around the ashram with this woman from America. And she'd said that Maharishi had acted rather inappropriately towards her, and Mia Farrow had said sort of a similar thing. So at some point, then Alex went to John, or John and George, and said that and embellished it probably, kind of like, see, told you you should have gone to mine, a kind of thing. And anyway, so then George and John went to see Maharishi that evening before we all left. And Maharishi had said, why are you going? Why are you going? The story has it that John said, well, you should know if you're so fucking cosmic. And, it's like, oh God. And so the next day was just awful because there was Maharishi. I'd been told by George, okay, come on, you, Patty, and I, we're moving. We're going to go and visit Ravi Shankar in South India. We're going. And I didn't know any of this was going on. I was completely oblivious and loving the meditation. And Maharishi's been alerted, the prize troop were leaving. And as he sat there with his person, holding his umbrella above Maharishi's head to sort of, stop him getting sunburnt, and we all had to walk past him. And it was just a sort of silence. And every now
Mm.
and then he'd say, boys, boys, why are you leaving? And I tell you, I mean, I never was a great fan of Maharishi himself, but I'd got to love the meditation. But
That's very interesting, by the way, because it's like I mean I've got many friends who've been involved with the meditation for years,
mm,
and yet I've never felt that Maharishi was someone who appealed to me as a
right.
character. So that's quite interesting.
Yes, that is. And yet, I was content. I mean, I kept thinking, oh, gosh, he can see if he's so cosmic, he can see that I'm not that actually sort of keen on him. But in the end, I started forgetting about all that and just enjoying the meditation.
Mm.
But so when I did get back to England, so Patty and George and I went to South India, and that was a pretty amazing trip, and toured with Ravi Shankar for a while. And when I did get back to England, and I heard that Maharishi was coming over, and he was going to be back in Wales doing, giving people their mantra and stuff. I got the train there and went to see him, and I said to him, "I'm so sorry that that happened." And he said, "Why? Why did it happen?" So he was still
Right.
confused. And I said, "I don't know, but I just came to say I'm so sorry it did." And that was it.
And of course, despite all the trappings, he's a person, and it's so easy to be wounded by people, no matter what position you're in, uh,
True.
basically seeing you as rubbish
Yeah.
after having turned
Yeah.
that positive projection into the
Yeah.
negative projection.
But years later, George told me when we were living and when I was living in LA, and many years later, George told me that he'd gone back to TM and he'd been in touch with Maharishi, and so there was obviously a reconnection.
That's nice. Yes.
Mm.
Um, and what led you to Donovan and to Mick Fleetwood? How did those
Okay, so the Donovan, well, mix first because I was still at school in Notting Hill Gate, and I'd go with my friends to the local coffee shop afterwards, the coffee mill in Notting Hill Gate, and sometimes mixed band called the Shanes. I guess that's where they would go, or the restaurant near next door where they'd have an omelette before a gig. And I remember being in school and in a class, and a friend of mine brought out this wire figure and put it in her inkwell, empty inkwell hole. And I asked her who it was, and she said, "Oh, it's this wonderful man, a wonderful boy. He's in this band called the Shanes." And she obviously had like major crush on him. Said, "I'll introduce you to him." But anyway, got to see him, and he was very nice, and he took us to this "do you want to come to the gig" kind of thing. And so it was in Brentwood. And while I was there, we were sitting because they all had to put their own equipment on the stage themselves and bring it themselves. And while we were there, and I was sitting next to him, and Dale, my friend, was on the other side, just waiting for the rest of the band to arrive. And he put his foot on mine, and I tried to sort of take it away, and he pressed harder, he wouldn't let me take him away. And I thought, oh no, Dale's got the crush on him. And so I sort of ended up going out with one of the singer or something. Um, but then afterwards, Mick and I got together, and we were probably about 17, and he
uh,
was the same age. And yeah, and very, very sweet. And then I think there was, because we were so young, there was a part of me that just felt I needed to go and explore the world. And so that's when I went to San Francisco and then India. So we'd always be in touch, but then, not as boyfriend, girlfriend. And then later on, he asked me if I would marry him. And I suppose, we were both young, and so that's what we did. And by then, Peter Green had just left the band. I did quite a lot of touring with Peter then. He was just this wonderful, amazing musician and person. And Chris McVie had joined it, and John McVie. We were all in Kiln House, and then they had this album called Kiln House. And that's where we lived for a while because Peter had left, and they were trying to kind of, get songs going. So that was Mick. But also, I did have a couple of songs on. I had co-wrote a song with Chris and another one on another of their albums called Bare Trees. So Donovan was after we'd gone to Wales, had been initiated, and then we had to wait a couple of months to go to India, and they opened up the Apple Boutique. And so I was asked if I could be the manager at Apple Boutique, plus someone called Pete Shotton, who was a friend of John Lennon's. So I worked there for a while, and while I was working there, Donovan happened to come down the stairs with his friend Gypsy Dave, and I'd met him before at Patty and George's house, and he didn't know I was working there, and obviously wanted to know all about Maharishi and about San Francisco, and he was kind of like, this is something new that's happening. Anyway, one day he asked me if I'd go and visit go and have lunch with his manager and him, and there were a few people. And it was while we were there at his manager's house, and he said, "Oh, I've written a song for you." And so he started playing Jennifer Juniper, when there were just the two of us in the room. And I didn't know where to look because I was actually very shy. And I realized it was about me. And I realized, he'd said something, "Is she pretty? Yes, ever so. Would you marry her? Yes, I would, sir," or something like that.
Wow.
Uh,
Wow.
and so it was sweet, but I wasn't, but it was never that sort of relationship. And, it's like just, and whenever I hear it nowadays, it just represents this time of innocence.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
I think I hear a lot of innocence actually, even in all of the characters involved that you've spoken about as well. It's like there's this, this new world seemingly being born, the magical 60s,
yeah.
and all that went with that, and actually also all of the shadow of that as well.
Well, exactly. And we believed we could change the world.
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And in some ways, I mean, the Beatles certainly they have in terms of music, have had more impact on the world than any other musicians ever.
absolutely. And
Yeah,
it continues.
and it continues.
I'm
Yes,
actually doing work. I've been asked to go to Chicago and give talk at the Beatle Fest. They have the Beatle Fest in New
great.
York and then in Chicago every year. And apparently the guy Mark Lapidos, he asked John all those years ago, can he do this? And John had said, yeah, sure. So it's like over 50 years that all these people who've been Beatle fans or just had Beatles in their lives and their children or their grandchildren, it's extraordinary.
Yes,
Mm,
that's lovely. I mean, I hear some very beautiful memories of those times, and I
mm.
wonder if there was darkness. I mean, obviously, Magic Alex sounds a bit of a dark shadow in this as well,
Yeah.
but I wonder if there was darkness in those times as well that you were aware of. But of course, you were very young then as well, and may not have
I
noticed
was
that.
very young and naive in very many ways.
Yes,
I think, when I was in San Francisco, I was offered a lift from a Hell's Angel, and I kind of thought, oh, okay. And actually, it was fine. And then I remember going to a party with all these Hell's Angels in there in the middle of the woods with friends and stuff. I mean, and everybody was high on acid, but there was this naivety in some ways. Sometimes that can protect you,
yes, yes, exactly.
innocence,
Yes, you're not putting out sort of
pride,
mixed
fear.
signals, yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
fear.
yeah.
So you married Mick twice. I'm interested why you would marry someone
Okay,
twice.
so we married and it was lovely and everything. And then when we went to LA, um, after a few years, and we had our children by then, and that's where they met Stevie and Lindsay, and then everything took off. So, and not only that, then it was a time of huge, where everyone was taking cocaine, especially in studios, and especially because you've got to get this record done, for Warner Brothers at a certain time. So that it was tough. And because I was the only one that had kids, um, it was tough because often Mick wouldn't come home or he'd just need his time where before he had to go back into the studio or they'd go on the road. And it was quite a tricky time. And I think at some point that we sort of separated and then we got back together. And that had been what happened throughout our whole married life. We'd be separating, going back together, because it's like we both wanted it to work, but there was so much, and what was so difficult was the whole drug alcohol thing and this absolute need to make it,
Yes,
to become famous, they were getting it. And then it was, it's everybody was out of their heads a lot of the time. And so that's tricky, I can go down and I'd go down to the studio and the kids, and then I'd have to go back. And, so it's sort of like a very um, difficult time in that way.
yes.
And then there was one
Because
point where
Fleetwood Mac did become enormous, didn't they?
they were
They're one
enormous.
of the great iconic
Yeah.
bands of our
But
time.
then, but people change. We know that, it's because it's the drugs or it's the alcohol. And so that's very hard. I didn't know about Al-Anon or I didn't know about therapy or anything like that. And both of us were terrible and always had been at communicating. Those are things to be learned later. And then we got divorced, and And then we needed green cards because then they were big and they were having to go, they needed to go to England but come back to the States. And so there was somebody who was one of the, I can't remember who he was, but he would allow us to have a green card if Fleetwood Mac did a concert for him. So that's why Mick and I, but we had to get married beforehand
Wow.
so we could go as a family. It wasn't like romantic, oh, we realize we really love each other. No, that
No.
part is gone. It's just like it was all about Fleetwood Mac. It's literally you marry the band.
Yes. Yes. And are you respected as a wife of a band member as well?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think I was respected. I remember their lawyer that they had. I remember him saying to me, "You're the only woman who's, married or going out with one of the band members that was never changed by the fame."
That's
I took
interesting.
that as a big compliment because
It
I
is.
suppose it didn't really phase me because, you can't get much more famous than the Beatles, or you can't, I'd been in that life and that lifestyle where it doesn't, since being so young.
Yes. And when you look back on that, what do you miss about that life, or do you miss anything about that life? And what does your life look like now?
Well, I had I loved listening to their music. It was so much fun, because I love to dance, and so it was just so cool. There was a lot of it that was really tough, and especially, with children as well. And then I married another musician. Went to go and take
I
the
not.
children to England. Oh, yeah, hadn't heard about him, had you?
No,
So
that's
take the children to England because I thought I want my kids to respect their dad. And I thought, well, maybe this is just something he's going through, or I don't know. So we moved to England, but by then, Mick had got somebody else, and there's somebody called Ian Wallace, and he was the drummer from North England. In fact, it was at a Christmas at Chris McVie's house because I'd go there with the children, and I met him there. And he had played with Dylan, and he'd played with a lot of musicians that we know, and and so we got together, and then I moved back to LA, vowing I would never move back to LA, and I would never marry another musician. I did both of those things, and he played with Bonnie Raitt, he played with Crosby, Stills and Nash, and you know, let's see, yeah. Anyway, a lot of musicians who I was then able to interview for my book, and so I think what I had a turning point when I was with him because I realized I'd made a mistake. I'd just kind of swapped Mick for somebody else with a different name, another Mick, and so. We went on our honeymoon after being together for a few years, and I would say this. I was trying to think, what was my turning point, and we were with a couple of one of these one of the musicians that Ian had been playing with, and her boyfriend, and they bought some magic mushrooms, like the synthetic ones. And we were on the beach. They said, "Come on, let's have one of these each." I hadn't done anything like that since the 60s. So I joined in and I could, you start laughing your head off. And I thought, oh God, we're getting a little bit conspicuous. So I suggested we all went into the sea. So they were strong swimmers. I've never been a strong swimmer and I've always been terrified of the sea since I was little. Anyway, I'm out, way out of my depth. They're even further out. And I'd forgotten, although I had a mask, I didn't bring the bit so you can breathe.
Snorkel,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, snorkel. And um, and I was looking down and it was like all this wonderful sort of things to look at. And I got completely sort of taken away with it and believed I didn't really want to put my head up anymore to take breaths, that I could breathe underwater. And of course, spluttering, terrified, way out of my depth, no more waves coming, and just terrified I was going to start, keep on thinking like that I can breathe underwater again because I was out of my head. So I swam back as fast as I could. And when I got back, I sort of sat on the beach shivering, just terrified. and what could have happened. And then I decided, actually, it's time I gave back. I've had an amazing life. I was probably 36, about 36. I've had an amazing life, but it's time I gave back. And so when holiday was finished, I went into I did a 3-month course on talking to kids in their state schools in America about drugs and alcohol. And I'd go with a partner. We all partnered up with somebody because I was a bit too shy to sort of actually voice myself in front of the class. But I would talk to the little girls afterwards and chat with them and wear sort of lovely jewelry like beaded bracelets and things. So they would come up to me and then I could talk to them. So I did that, and then I realized actually I want to go to college. I need to learn stuff, and I was interested in holistic health, and that's when I went to college, and I had to really struggle because of my background. They thought I wasn't going to be able to keep up the pace and stick with it. So I was on sort of, they were checking me out. And I carried on for 4.5 years and got my master's in counseling psychology. And then I decided I was doing some therapeutic work, but realized I want to write. That's what I really love. And so then did the PhD in humanities. And my dissertation was then what became the book. But it was difficult because then I wouldn't go on the road and then I wouldn't go to so and so David Crosby's wedding or that kind of thing. I for the first time was saying I'm doing something for me. So that was my turning point and it was huge. And stop drinking, stop doing all that stuff, which was tricky because Ian at that time, if I wasn't drinking, he'd drink more. Or what it's like. And then after I'd written the PhD dissertation and finished the book and had it published, I needed to find a job. And that was when I went into the addiction field and worked at a place called Sierra Tucson. And then over the years, then I came to England and I got people into treatment. And it sort of went on for about 20 years. And I would take some of the psychiatrists and therapists to Cottonwood, one of the places I worked at, and bring them over to us. And so it was sort of getting people to get to know each other. But I felt that in America, they were much more ahead of the game psychologically. And so I wanted to integrate it with what we had in England, which was we were quite sort of far behind in the addiction field at
Yeah.
that time. So that's, my life changed.
And it feels like you found your sense of purpose. I mean, it must have been incredibly difficult to break free of all that glamour that you'd been around. It was like you were at the pinnacle of that place, and also you would have had all the projections, like it's like someone like Donovan, sort of like falling in love with you and falling in love with an idealized version of you. Probably, I'm not saying you're not that at all lovable as well, but it's like
Yeah.
it's very easy to project,
Yeah.
and yeah, so I think it's clearly you're treading your path now, and it feels like meditation has helped you along the way,
Mm-hmm.
and also probably the company of others of like mind as well, where you're not just in the sort of like the beautiful people's circle, but you're around people who are deeply searching for something. I know that you're a
Yeah.
friend of my
Yes.
ex-girlfriend Sarah as well, so
Yeah. 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 But it's nice now because, well, it's always nice, but it's like what I mean is that because I never spoke about, my relationship, say, to the Beatles or anything in this college. It's like, so I was completely, I could be, but the funny thing is, I wasn't used to just seeing everyday people. So the first day I was at that college, and they were going around that you had to give your name, you had to say why you were here. You were definitely getting into the psychology of what are you doing here, and what is your purpose, and and I knew it was getting closer to me, and I thought, oh no, they're going to see I'm different because I speak with an English accent, and as it got closer to me, I tried to put my hand up to say I think I'm going to pass out, and then I passed out
wow,
because it was such a big leap for me.
mm, wow,
So from wanting to be hidden, I was suddenly the focal point because I'd passed out.
very interesting.
And that was the place, but when, it was great. I loved it. It was, very much psychology and it was the place where I could say, actually, this is who I am and this is my background. But it was
Yeah.
almost like I didn't ever want to say that stuff before.
And then you, of course, you reversed all that by writing the Icons of Rock, which was your experiences of moving in those circles, and that
Yeah,
must be quite cathartic
that
as well, writing that down.
well, that's also true. But I always thought I wasn't creative, and that was what bugged me for all these years. I wasn't creative. I'd write poems about not being creative, but then look who I was around. Look who I was batting against.
Yes,
So I thought, okay, my world has been very much, to do with musicians, but also for my own sake, I don't feel creative. How many other people don't feel creative? And that's what drove me. And it was amazing because I didn't need to look far. Obviously, we had, I knew George and that was easy, and Eric, and, because that was all part of the family. But then all the musicians that Ian had been playing with and all of Fleetwood Mac. And I just needed to think of somebody like the blues musicians. How was I ever going to get hold of them? And somehow I did. It was like I was on this, I kept asking them questions about the peak experience. It was like I was on this kind of in the zone, just
right.
writing this.
Yes, yes.
Everything was coming together, all the synchronicity.
So it still feels like your purpose is still opening out. You're about to write you're partway through writing a fiction novel as well.
Yeah.
And are you still working in the field of addiction at all, or
No, no, I'm not. Then I left it. Then I organized, I had my own company doing workshops, for getting therapists to come over. So then I finished all that and just concentrated on writing,
Mm,
which has been great. And I do quite a bit of public speaking as well. And that's fun because I used to be terrified. I'd organize a conference, a mindfulness conference, and knew everybody that was going to be speaking at it. But I couldn't stand there and say to everybody, this is so and so, and this is so and so, because although I knew them, some very well, I would forget their names. So I
yes.
was that petrified. But then, and then that changed. And now it's just a joy because I feel I'm connecting with people and people want to know. And, it's lovely. It's got a very nice feel about it.
It also feels a lot more sort of authentic as well, that you're being your authentic self
Yes,
stage.
yes,
So we're
yes.
coming close to the end of our, I mean, I could go on talking to you for hours, and I remember you speaking for me at
Hmm.
Alternatives, and you gave a wonderful talk there, and I was really impressed with your capacity to use words, and as you say, you were incredibly shy, but somehow you flipped that on its head, and
Mm,
you're very assertive now, and when you're speaking, or certainly you come across that way.
yeah.
The question I always ask towards the end of the interview is, what's the particular dragon you've had to slay? What's the hurdle you've had to overcome in order to be who you are now?
I would say it goes back to childhood that I never felt loved by
Mm,
my mother. My father was he was a PTSD survivor from the war,
yeah,
staring at walls. We grew up in Africa, and I think that feeling, it's like I had to build myself up. I had to build the father that I never knew, that male part of me. I had to build that up myself. I had
yes.
to build up, bring the mother and bring that in. And I think that has been the journey, I think.
Mm.
Yeah,
Well, it's a wonderful star-studded journey, and I can see that you feel in yourself as well. You're embodying what you're speaking.
yeah,
To me, that's a powerful process.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's lovely to speak with you, Malcolm. I
very
mean,
lovely.
yeah, it's nice. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jenny. I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing with us. And it's wonderful to get reminiscences from someone who's been there at the making of history firsthand as well. So
Mm. Yeah.
much appreciated.